It was supposed to be just another late-night interview. Lights on, cameras rolling, scripted laughs. But beneath Will Smith's charming grin, something else was brewing. A need to break the facade, to test what he thought might be weakness. Denzel Washington, composed and commanding as ever, stepped onto that stage with a quiet authority that stilled the room more effectively than applause ever could. No one expected the question Will would ask, and even fewer were prepared for the answer Denzel would deliver. Oh, and before we continue, tell us in the comments, what's your favorite Denzel Washington movie of all time? The studio of the talk show Face to Face was a marvel of modern production. Backlit glass panels shimmered with shifting hues of deep violet and blue, giving the set an almost cathedral-like aura. Everything, from the cream leather armchairs angled for intimacy to the discreet overhead lights that sparkled like distant stars, had been crafted for this very moment. A special episode, two giants of Hollywood, one unforgettable conversation. But behind the glitz, behind the rehearsed applause, and the precise countdowns, something else lingered in the air. Something unspoken, something volatile. Helena Cortez, the show's host and one of the most respected journalists in American media, adjusted her earpiece backstage. She had interviewed presidents, scientists, artists, and exiled rebels. Yet tonight, her pulse was faster than usual. There was a gravity to this pairing, Will Smith and Denzel Washington, that even she couldn't fully predict. She stepped onto the stage just as the floor manager gave her the go-ahead. 30 seconds, Helena. We're live nationwide. She nodded, smoothed down her suit jacket, and took her position under the spotlight. As the theme music swelled, the countdown echoed through the studio. In 5, 4, 3, 2, cue the lights, cue the audience, cue the moment. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Helena greeted the crowd, her voice calm yet vibrant. Tonight's face-to-face is something special. We are joined not just by two of Hollywood's biggest names, but by two men who have shaped generations, not only with their craft, but with their choices, their silences, and their words. The audience clapped with anticipation. First, a man whose name is synonymous with charisma, resilience, and box office gold. He has faced fame head-on with courage, laughter, and sometimes controversy. Please welcome Will Smith. The crowd erupted. The familiar beat of "Gettin' Jiggy With It" pulsed through the speakers as Will Smith entered the stage with his signature energy. He danced a little, high-fived someone in the front row, gave Helena a quick hug, and sat down, smiling with the confidence of a man who had owned stages for decades. Helena waited for the cheers to die down before continuing. And now a man who has become a symbol, a living testament to strength, dignity, and unwavering artistic integrity. He doesn't chase the spotlight, but somehow it always finds him. Please welcome Denzel Washington. The music shifted, calmer, more introspective, almost reverent. Denzel walked in with deliberate steps, dressed sharply in a tailored dark suit and a crisp white shirt. No tie, a simple gold ring on his finger. He greeted Helena with a firm handshake, then turned to Will, offering another steady handshake. Firm, composed. Will smiled broadly, giving Denzel a friendly pat on the back. But there was something else in his eyes. A glimmer of challenge, of something deeper than mere show banter. Denzel caught it, and without a word, he acknowledged it. Helena gestured for them to take their seats, facing each other in twin armchairs with a small table between them. Will, Denzel, welcome, she said, her tone warm yet commanding. Tonight, this is your space. No filters, no scripts, just conversation. The world is listening. The lights dimmed slightly, the camera zoomed in, and the air thickened with expectation. Will leaned back, still smiling. Man, I've always wanted to share a stage with you, Jimin, he said to Denzel. You've got this whole Hollywood general thing going, like nobody knows if you're about to quote Shakespeare or deliver a courtroom monologue that'll break us all. The audience laughed. Denzel offered a small, knowing smile. We all break something, he said quietly, even when all we're trying to do is listen. But, Denzel continued, the world doesn't respect me because I'm quiet. They respect me because I stopped performing. Will looked down. For a moment, something flickered across his face, something close to recognition. "You think I'm performing right now?" he asked, voice low. Denzel didn't answer directly. Instead, he shared a story. "There was a young man, and maybe 10 years ago," Denzel began, "stopped with me outside a bookstore. He looked tired, hollow. He didn't ask for a photo. He just said, 'Your movies helped me survive my brother's death.'" Denzel's voice dropped even lower. Then he said, "You showed me I didn't have to end my life." The studio air grew dense. Will swallowed hard. Even Helena sat frozen. "I didn't say anything," Denzel continued. "I just hugged him. We stood there silent for a full minute. No words, just presence. That moment said more than 1,000 interviews." Will sat back, eyes staring somewhere beyond the studio lights. "That kind of pain," he said quietly. "I know it, but I had to keep moving, keep making noise, keep being Will Smith." Denzel let the silence stretch, giving him space. Sometimes the noise keeps us from hearing what's really breaking. Will looked up, and this time there was no performance in his gaze. "So you just disappeared after your losses?" Will asked. Denzel nodded. "I didn't want to live in a world that could take them away." "But you came back," Will pointed out. "You still made movies, still played heroes." Denzel met his eyes, "Because I realized silence isn't escape, it's preparation." Will frowned. "Preparation for what?" Denzel didn't hesitate. "The truth." A low murmur rolled through the audience. Will let the words settle before leaning forward. "You want truth? Fine." The energy shifted again. Will's voice sharpened, not aggressive, but heavy with a kind of weary defiance. "You talk about silence like it's some holy thing. But I didn't get that luxury. I couldn't disappear. When the world came for me, my mistakes, my breakdowns, I had to stand there, take it, apologize, rebuild. You disappear and come back like some saint, all calm and sad-eyed." Denzel didn't flinch. "And that makes you angry?" Will stared at him, then unexpectedly laughed, a bitter sound. "I guess it does." Silence fell. Then Denzel spoke again, steady and quiet. "Maybe because you believe the only way to earn love is to suffer publicly." Will's eyes narrowed. He opened his mouth, but no words came. "You think love comes from applause," Denzel continued. "But applause fades, Will. It always fades." Helena finally found her voice. "But don't we all seek validation in some form?" Denzel turned to her, his expression kind, patient. "Validation is like sugar," he said. "It gives you a rush, but presence that nourishes." The audience sat in total silence now, not out of boredom, but reverence. Will looked tired, not physically, but in a way that reached deeper. "You know what, man?" he said, voice rough, like something old and heavy was rising to the surface. He spoke, his voice softer now. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed quiet more. Maybe people wouldn't hate me so much." "People don't hate you," Denzel said calmly. "They just don't know how to hold your pain." Will looked at him, then away, searching the floor. "And what about you?" Will asked. "What do you do with your pain?" Denzel sat with the question, unhurried, his eyes steady, unwavering. "I don't fight it," he said. "I sit with it. I walk with it. Some days, it walks me." Will fell silent. So did the audience. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Then Denzel leaned forward. "Can I ask you something else?" Will nodded, barely. "What would happen if you stopped being Will Smith for just one night?" Will didn't answer. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened now, but he fought the tears threatening to rise. Denzel didn't press. He just sat there, steady, present. Somehow the silence was louder than anything Will had ever heard. Will opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Denzel raised his hand slightly, pausing him. "There's one more thing I need to know," Denzel said. Will looked up, bracing. Denzel's voice dropped to a near whisper, but it echoed like thunder. "Who are you when no one's clapping?" Denzel leaned in, eyes calm, unwavering. "Why did you really want this interview, Will?" Will smirked, trying to reclaim control. "Come on, man, it's ratings. 2 legends, 1 couch, it's good TV." But Denzel didn't blink. No, there's something more. Will shifted in his seat, uneasy. The audience sensed it too. All right, Will said finally. Maybe I wanted contrast, loud and quiet, fire and water. Denzel tilted his head slightly. Or maybe you needed to confront something. In me, or in yourself. Will looked away, then back. You know what I hate, he muttered. That people worship your calm. You barely speak. And they act like you're some enlightened sage. Denzel remained still. And that bothers you? He asked gently. Will's voice snapped. Hell yeah, it does. I've bled for my applause. Worked, grinded, suffered loudly. You just exist. And somehow they love you more for it. Denzel's voice stayed even, almost tender. Maybe they're not loving me. Maybe they're loving the space I leave for them to see themselves. Will paused, his face cracking. Not with anger this time, but with something more fragile. You ever feel like you're running just to stay visible? All the time, Denzel said. Until I stopped. Will scoffed. Easy for you to say. You disappeared. You had the luxury of silence. I stayed, took the hits, owned my scandals. And did that bring peace? Will didn't answer. Denzel's voice softened. I've lost people too. My mother, close friends. I didn't disappear because I was wise. I disappeared because I was grieving. Will looked at him, really looked. And the silence helped? He asked. No, Denzel said. At first it swallowed me, but eventually it became a place where I could hear my own voice again. Will sat back, whispering now. I don't even know what mine sounds like anymore. Denzel leaned in, his tone low, almost a whisper. That's why we're here. Will blinked, emotion rising in his throat. I came to expose you, he said, voice cracking. Make you crack. But all I've done is crack open myself. Maybe that's the point, Denzel said. Will's voice trembled. You don't understand. I need the noise, the laugh track, the love. Denzel nodded, understanding. We all need love, but if it only exists when you're performing, is it love or applause? The question landed heavy, too heavy to deflect. Will lowered his gaze. You think I'm still acting? I think, Denzel said gently, you're tired. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was full of recognition. Will lifted his eyes slowly. You know the scariest thing, he said, voice barely audible. I don't know who I am when the cameras turn off. Denzel's reply was steady, unwavering. Then it's time to find out. Will didn't respond, but something inside him, something unseen, collapsed quietly. He wasn't performing anymore. He was finally listening. The silence in the studio was no longer awkward. It was transformative. Will Smith looked up at Denzel Washington, still reeling from everything that had been said. You know what? Will said, his voice lower now, almost hoarse. People only love you because you don't talk. Denzel didn't blink. And what if that's true? Then maybe if you spoke more, they'd see who you really are. And maybe, they wouldn't like it. Denzel's reply was soft, steady. You think love has to be loud to be real? Will stood halfway, then sat back down, frustrated. I earned every bit of love I got. Every cheer, every laugh, I fought for it. And what if I earned mine by stopping the fight? Denzel asked, his voice almost a whisper. The audience leaned in. Will's jaw tightened. You hide behind metaphors. You speak in riddles. Denzel nodded, unbothered. Or maybe I just got tired of performing pain for people who don't know what to do with silence. Will exhaled sharply through his nose. You think I like performing? I think, Denzel said quietly, you forgot who you are underneath it. Will's eyes flicked between Denzel and the crowd. I don't even know anymore. Denzel leaned forward, calm but firm. Then maybe that's the question you have been avoiding. Will swallowed hard. You don't get it. If I stop performing, I disappear. Denzel's voice was barely a whisper. Or maybe you return. Will's head snapped up, startled. You ever feel like you're just a character in someone else's movie? He asked, voice fraying. Denzel's gaze stayed steady. Every day until I decided to walk off the set. Helena remained silent, barely breathing. Will's voice cracked. You know what scares me? The idea that no one would care if I was just me. Denzel tilted his head slightly. Then let's test it. Take the mask off. Right here. Right now. Will let out a bitter laugh. You say that like it's easy. It's not, Denzel said. It's honest. Will stood up. He turned to face the audience, then back to Denzel. I built a version of myself people admire, he said. But I don't know if I admire him. Denzel stepped closer, voice low but firm. Then maybe it's time to meet the version who doesn't need applause. Will looked at him, his eyes glassy. You think he's worth meeting? I think he's waiting, Denzel said. Will sat down again, trembling slightly. I wanted to break you tonight, he confessed. Wanted to prove you weren't this untouchable mystery. And? Denzel asked, calm. Will sighed, voice low. I think I'm the one breaking. Denzel didn't move, didn't smile. Then you're finally getting honest. Will looked up, whispering, I forgot who I was before the fame. Denzel leaned forward, his voice a warm, steady echo. Then let's remember. Together. Will sat there in silence, jaw tight, breathing uneven. Then he spoke. You want the truth? I didn't invite you here because I admire you. Denzel stayed quiet, steady. Will looked down, ashamed. I invited you because I wanted to beat you. The audience froze. I spent years watching people love you, love you for just being quiet. I scream, bleed, sweat for the crowd, and you, he pointed at Denzel, you just exist and they love it. Denzel didn't react. I hated that, Will said, voice cracking, because I felt like if I ever stopped trying, I'd vanish. Denzel nodded softly. Trying what? Will's voice was broken now, trying to be enough. The words hung in the air like a sacred confession. I perform because I don't trust silence, Will said, almost inaudible. In silence, I hear the fear, the doubt, the stuff I've been running from since I was a kid. Denzel leaned in slightly. And what happens if you stop running? Will let out a bitter laugh. I don't know, maybe I collapse. Denzel's voice was gentle, almost fatherly. Then maybe it's time to collapse. Will stared at him, stunned. You're saying fall apart? I'm saying stop pretending you're not already breaking. Will's hand covered his mouth. His shoulders trembled slightly. Then he spoke again. I missed recitals, birthdays. I told myself I was building a future for them, Will said, voice raw. But really, I was hiding in the work. Denzel nodded slowly. You weren't building a life, you were building a disguise. Will's voice dropped to a whisper. You ever wonder what you pass down to your kids, besides the money? Denzel answered without hesitation. We pass on what we don't heal. Will closed his eyes, pained. I don't know how to forgive myself. It starts with honesty, Denzel said, calm and sure. And you're already doing that. Will opened his eyes. They were red but clearer now. You really think I can come back from all this? Denzel didn't flinch. You don't need to come back. You just need to show up. Silence followed, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, peaceful. Still. Will smiled through the tears. You talk like someone who's already buried the worst parts of himself. Denzel looked at him, steady. I have, and I visit the grave often. Will exhaled. You said earlier, the world doesn't need versions of me, just me about my... Denzel nodded. The world needs the man, not the act. Will shook his head slowly. I wish someone had told me that before. Maybe, Denzel said gently, you weren't ready to hear it until now. They sat in the quiet, no roles, no masks, just truth. Denzel sat still, but his eyes carried the weight of years. Will Smith looked at him, quieter now. Why are you always so calm? Will asked. Denzel exhaled slowly. Because I lost everything and didn't know how to keep breathing. Will sat up straighter. When my mother died, Denzel continued, the world went silent. But it wasn't peace, it was emptiness. I stopped smiling, stopped feeling. People called it mystery, but really I was just broken. Will nodded slowly. And no one saw that, he said. They saw what they wanted to see, Denzel said. But kindness was all I had left. That didn't hurt. Will's eyes welled up. That's why people trust you, he said. You don't fake your pain. Denzel looked at him, gentle but firm. And you do? Will didn't answer right away. I've faked everything, Will admitted. Strength, cool, forgiveness, even joy. I gave people what they needed so I wouldn't have to show them what I didn't have. The air thickened. I cheated, Will said. I lied. I disappeared emotionally, all while smiling, apologizing with style. Denzel listened without judgment. You were trying to fix the image, he said, not the wound. Will nodded slowly. I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, gave enough, they'd love me without the act. But they never saw me, because I never showed them me. Denzel leaned in. Maybe now you are. Will's voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I look at my kids, and I wonder what I'm passing down. My fear, my need to be perfect. We pass on what we don't heal, Denzel replied softly. Will wiped his eyes. I built a life people admire, but I don't admire the man who lives in it. Denzel looked at him, steady. Then maybe it's time to meet the man who doesn't need applause. Will shook his head. I don't know who that is. He's still there, Denzel said. Just quiet. Helena, her voice almost breaking, finally spoke. Will, what would you say to him? The man behind the image? Will hesitated. Then he whispered, I'm sorry I left you behind. Denzel smiled, soft, knowing. That's a start. Another long silence passed, but it wasn't awkward. It was healing. Will looked up again. How do you forgive yourself? He asked. Denzel answered without hesitation. By staying, by not abandoning the parts of you that hurt. Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's presence. Will nodded slowly. I think I've spent my whole life running from stillness. Denzel reached out, placing a hand on Will's shoulder, then stopped running. Will's eyes watered again. I think I just met myself. Denzel smiled gently. And you're still here. The studio was silent, not with awkwardness, but with the sacredness of something real just having unfolded. Will Smith sat still, eyes red but steady. Denzel Washington sat beside him, grounded, open, calm. Helena finally broke the quiet, voice soft. Will, would you like to say something? Will stood slowly, no bravado, no act, just breath. I brought Denzel here tonight to prove something, he said, voice steady, to show the world he's just a man. Will turned to Denzel, eyes glassy. But tonight, Bim, he showed me that I'm just a man, and that's enough. He turned back to the audience. I've lived my whole life chasing applause, thinking that's where love came from.